broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. We're in the midst of the Council's budget review process, which will encompass a large number of public hearings and councilor working sessions. And we strongly encourage residents to take a moment to engage in this process by giving testimony for the record. You can do that in a bunch of different ways. One is to actually attend one of these hearings and give your public testimony. We'll take it at the end of each hearing, and we'll also have 4 sessions dedicated to public participation. So if you want to find the full schedule, you can go to boston.gov/council-budget. And we'll be having these departmental hearings most days from now through early June. And we'll be having our first dedicated public testimony hearing tomorrow, Wednesday, April 28th at 6 p.m., focused on priorities for an equitable recovery. So whatever you want to see the city devoting both our city and federal funds to on that front. And then on May 25th and June 3rd, so more towards the end of the process, we'll have 2 more 6 p.m. public testimony hearings. The one on the 25th focused on the BPS budget, which is also our subject today, and the one on the 3rd focused on any aspect, any department. If you want to sign up to give public testimony, there's an online form. You can find it on our council budget review website. So that, again, it's boston.gov/council-budget. Or you can just shoot an email to ccc.wm@boston.gov. That's ccc.wm, as in Ways and Means, at boston.gov. We take public testimony in the order folks sign up and ask people to state their name and affiliation or residence and keep it to 2 minutes just so we can get everybody in. You can also send written testimony to the same email, ccc.wm@boston.gov, or submit a 2-minute video of your testimony also through the form on our website. So if you can't come to the hearing, but you want to be on video, we'll actually attach that. As long as you get it in 48 hours in advance, we'll attach it to the live video of the hearing. Or you can tweet at us using the hashtag BOSSBudget, BOS budget. So again, websites, boston.gov/council-budget. We'd love to have your involvement any way you see fit. And we'll most Tuesdays throughout this process be focused on the Boston Public Schools, which are more than a third of the city's budget and obviously a really critical aspect of what we do as a city and a real focus, especially in this moment of recovering from a very hard year. So today's hearing is on docket 0524 to 0526, orders for the FY22 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Docket 0527 to 0528, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Docket 0529 to 0531, which are orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. And today our focus is the Boston Public Schools. Specifically, this will be the budget overview presentation. We'll talk about the Return, Recover, Imagine plan, and also talk sort of at an overview level about the plan for city, CARES, ESSER, ARP funds. So there's a lot of different federal funds that we've gotten lots of questions about. And we have asked BPS to kind of throughout this process be clear about the way that those federal funds, how they're thinking about spending them in ways that complement the general funds to achieve, the things we need for our students. So we're joined here today by Superintendent Brenda Caselius, Chief Financial Officer Nate Cooter, Budget Director Miriam Rubin, Chief Equity and Strategy Officer Charles Granson, and Chief of Accountability Ava Mitchell, along with our Deputy Chief Financial Officer David Bloom. I also want to thank colleagues who are here. So my Vice Chair of Ways and Means and also the Chair of the Education Committee, Councilor Asabi George, Councilor Flynn from District 2, Councilor Wu, also at large, Councilor Campbell, District 4, Councilor Liz Braden, District 9, Councilor Baker, District 3, and Councilor Mejia at large. Thank you to all of them for being here. And without further ado, it's a long intro. We may have to make it more efficient as this process goes on. I want to pass it over to Superintendent Caselius and her team for their initial overview presentation.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and all of the counselors on the call. I want to first just start off with thanking the budget team and the whole entire team that is here, our equity team, our accountability team, and of course, everyone who's participated in this, our school committee who approved our budget and all the many hearings that we had. This budget, as you know, builds off of last year's investments of the $100 million 3-year funding commitment that we had from all of you and former Mayor Walsh. So I want to start by first just recognizing and thanking former Mayor Walsh for his vision in this strategic plan and his belief in the strategic plan that we are carrying out for this 5 years. Our school committee and also all of you for continuing to fund that in a year where we've had so much difficulty. I can imagine how people might think there are other priorities, and I want to thank you for putting the children of Boston first and their families. You've had a steady commitment to us and also to our incredible fiscal practices. Thanks to this team, we've been able to come on budget and keep our books good. So I want to, again, just thank the team for their incredible hard work. I know that many of my colleagues across the nation are in this similar position. They've had to make drastic budget cuts to their bottom line budgets, but we're in a very different position because of the support that you all have given and that the city has given through this pandemic. This pandemic has really made us reckon with the deep and systemic inequities and challenges that we have in Boston Public Schools. And, these inequities have kept many of our children from realizing their full potential. And we have been and continue to remain guided by the belief that every single child in every classroom in every school deserves the same. And sometimes for some of our historically underserved students, even greater opportunity to learn, grow, and thrive. And that is the definition that drives us toward a more equitable Boston Public Schools. And we now have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to bridge these longstanding opportunity gaps and to ensure that high-quality schools are across all our neighborhoods. And this $1.3 billion budget, $1 billion budget is framed with the guiding principles of return, recover, and reimagine. Our budget is heavily focused on improving student outcomes, advancing equitable recovery and accelerating learning, and promoting the whole school's community health and wellness amidst this COVID-19 pandemic. Our task is to return well and recover strong and to reimagine what's possible for our students. To prepare for our students to come back a safe return, as you know, we did come back fully in person this past Monday, but we're already starting to think about and plan with our teachers and our school leaders and stakeholders across all of Boston on what our new normal will look like next fall. So we're making continued investments in the health and safety and well-being, and you'll see investments in custodians in this budget, and also increasing our spending on facilities and maintenance contracts. Our goal is simple. We want our buildings to be a point of pride and our students to have access to the latest technology for learning. To support our students in recovery and ensure equitable access to critical supports, you'll see that we're investing 81 additional multilingual family liaisons and 95 new social workers who will provide a multi-tiered system of support for students and their families. This is even more important. We did this last year in our 33 transformation schools, but even more important now as we return, heal, and reconnect and rebuild community with our children and all of our entire school communities. Our new investment in family liaisons builds upon our investment that we made last year of 37 liaisons in our transformation schools, and it ensures that all of our schools have a full-time family liaison in their building for this upcoming school year. Our investment in social workers is also building upon our FY21 investments by moving beyond our initial investment of social workers in transformation schools this year to bringing at least a 0.5 social worker into every Boston Public Schools. These positions added to our school nursing positions create a foundation for Tier 2 support for students who are needing additional attention, guidance, and additional acceleration opportunities for them to be able to succeed and get what they need. We are in such a incredible moment that these investments were really serendipitous, forethought of thinking. The nursing investments were 2 years ago, and then all of the social workers and family liaisons this year have helped us to really tackle this pandemic. And I couldn't imagine a year without our nurses, the social workers, our family liaisons, the instructional facilitators that we put in that have been helping with the recovery, all of our custodians to keep the schools clean and safe for everyone. It's just been so helpful, and I'm so proud of the team who's really helped us rally for our students, help us with attendance rates, help us with any barriers to participation, helping us to connect with families who took on helping us with their child's education and all the community resources like housing and being able to house 1,700 families this year over the pandemic with the help of the city, food access, serving 6 million meals, and counseling that we've been able to do online for students experiencing mental health crisis. And so this year has just been so helpful. And as we've done this work, we've instituted equity roundtables at both the community level and the school level to really ensure that we integrate this investment into the racial equity vision and mission of the district, and all of the strategies that we're using to engage all of our community's voice and cultivate trust into the work and ensure that our focus is staying equitable. Also want to just share that we also have about $18.5 million in the budget. This is beyond the typical soft landings that we typically do for schools. To provide support and make sure that we didn't have deep cuts in our schools. And, this is supporting our goal of actively being an anti-racist school district. And this will help us structurally and systemically in terms of creating stability for our school districts. It's been an unbelievably difficult year, and particularly true for our most vulnerable students, and the devastating impacts that loss of enrollment could have had on the quality of programming for our Boston Public Schools would have really gone against what we believe about having equitable opportunity for all of our students. So in order to fully recover and to get back to our 5-year strategic plan, we made investments in our social workers, in our family liaisons, in our custodians, and then also now, as we think moving forward, stabilizing our schools in what has been a challenging year for us around enrollment in our next school year. And so the strategic plan is going to guide our work of the district over the next 5 years. It's going to improve student experience. We're going to accelerate outcomes, close opportunity gaps, and increase instructional quality and rigor. We need to change both minds and, which we call adaptive practice. We need to change our policies, and then we need to make sure that we resource that work. Because it's going to be both. Resources matter, absolutely, but it also is about the human capacity, the professional development that we'll give to our teachers, and the leadership supports that we'll give to our school leaders and managers at our central office. It's going to be an incredible endeavor, but we can do it, and we're excited about moving forward. We just announced this morning our commission charged with determining how we're going to equitably and sustainably invest in our future with the federal funding, which will match some of this 3-year commitment that we've gotten from the community and from the city. Nearly $400 million is available to us to use over the next 3 years. We plan on parsing that out over 3 years so that we can extend the funding and we can reimagine a district, one where it's worthy of the students that we serve, and where we can deliver on the promises that we have in our strategic plan. And we're going to reimagine the district with our community and with our stakeholders. The commission is one way that we're going to get feedback. And at the end of each commission meeting, there will be time for open comment. We're also going to have meetings with key stakeholder groups, and then also meetings out within the community. So there will be plenty of opportunity over the next 2 months for the public to weigh in. And then at the very end, we'll post the plan on July 1st for a very formal review and comment period, so people can give us written feedback, and then we'll submit our plan to the state on July 30th. And have the school committee vote on it near end of July. So as we reimagine our district And as we do this work over the next several days with all of you around our budget, I again just want to say thank you for having previous hearings on our strategic plan so that you know what we're trying to do within the district and you're all very familiar. Thank you for your questions and your pushing of us to do even better and holding us accountable to the promises that we've made to our family and to our communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Madam Chair, and my team. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. 1 second. I'm just getting a little bit of feedback. So do you guys want to jump into questions now, or did you have a presentation you wanted to share as well?
Yeah, I'll jump into the presentation if I could. Thank you. And good morning, counselors. I'm paranoid ever since I presented my email to all of school committee. Everyone sees the presentation and only the presentation. Well, good morning, and thank you for having us back. My name is Nathan Cooter. I'm the Chief Financial Officer, a resident of Roslindale and a proud parent of 2 BPS students who are back fully in person this week, all week. So we're very excited about that. And I want to thank you all for the opportunity for me to come and my team to come and present the fiscal year 22 budget on behalf of the Boston Public Schools. As the superintendent mentioned and gave a great introduction about, today's presentation is focused on the overall BPS budget, in particular, how we're using our resources to support schools and students to return well, recover strong, and reimagine what's possible for our students. And so I'm incredibly proud to be able to do that on behalf of the superintendent and the broader team who worked to put this budget together. We've started all of our presentations with this statement from the Opportunity Achievement Gap Policy, because we really need to focus on our collective urgency to close achievement gaps. And that really was the foundation for this budget. As the superintendent mentioned, there are a lot of things in this budget that were started before the pandemic began. And as COVID-19 had revealed the economic, health, and education disparities that many of us knew were present before the pandemic, we need to redouble our efforts. It's something we talked about last spring when we came before you. It's something that we have been focused on continuously for the last 12 months. We feel that by focusing on those students who need public education the most, and by providing intensive supports to those schools that are struggling to improve, we can ensure all students have the same opportunity to achieve greatness. And we need to maintain that focus and guarantee an excellent education for all of our students. We wanted to provide the highlights overall. Of course, we start with the $36 million commitment from the city, and we thank Mayor Janey for her continued commitment. She's been a longstanding education advocate, so we're not surprised. She's continued to support us with $36 million in new investments. 100% of those new investments are going directly to schools, either through direct supports in schools or through custodial services, which are considered school services budgeted centrally. This includes, as the superintendent mentioned, 95 new social worker positions and 80.5 new multilingual family liaisons, helping to secure connections with families. This is, of course, a multi-year effort that we are launching to focus on how do we recover and return from the pandemic. We have thought about this in 3 big areas. What are the academic supports, including intensive supports for students, intensive tutoring, summer school? How do we make sure that they are not just returning to where they were pre-pandemic, but accelerating to where they needed to be in the first place? We're focusing on health and wellness supports, recognizing that there's a lot of factors that are influencing education and the students. And then, of course, the community sports. We have tremendous resources in our city, and we need to make sure that we're engaging authentically with our families, authentically with our partners in the community to make sure we're wrapping around those supports. We're putting students at the center of our support and focusing on providing the resources that they need to be successful. As a district, of course, we're facing overall an impact from the pandemic. This graphic represents a conversation we had with the school committee back in December. And we've talked throughout the budget process with the communities about the effects of enrollment decline. Total actual enrollment has declined by about 2,300 students from last October to this past October. This represents the largest drop in enrollment that we've experienced in the last 15 years. This is the third consecutive year of significant enrollment declines in the district, which means that some of it is part of the trends that we were experiencing. The new census data was released, I believe, yesterday or this morning, that showed overall the population growth across the United States is the slowest since 1930. What we're seeing is people are having less children, they're having children later in life, and that has certainly been a demographic trend that we have been experiencing here in Massachusetts and in Boston. Of course, this means that the decline in enrollment is most pronounced in elementary grades, which declined by about 1,800 students, or about 7%. That means that enrollment in our elementary schools has declined about 3,500 students over the last 3 years. These enrollment changes are real and significant, which is why the superintendent has already highlighted the $18.5 million that Miriam Rubin, our budget director, will go into more detail on. But we have been doing more to support schools to maintain the school experience and the academic experience for students throughout this year. And so that's what we're going to be talking about and emphasizing throughout this budget hearing. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Charles Granson to talk about the strategic alignment.
Thanks, Chief Cooter. And you could just hit the slides a few more times. I think it's a few transitions. There you go. So good morning, counselors, and thanks again, Chief Cooter. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, we are keeping our commitments as outlined in the BPS strategic plan, Imagine BPS 2025. To continue to cultivate trust with the greater BPS and Boston community, we recognize the importance of following through with the feedback we received from over 2,000 stakeholders as the superintendent toured our schools and neighborhoods. This slide provides a visual of how we operationalize our strategic plan so that the community voice and input we received has a transformative impact on BPS students and classrooms. We do that by continuing to keep racial equity at the center of our planning and execution to close opportunity and achievement gaps. Next slide, please. This year, the superintendent and the finance team and district leaders worked strategically to ensure that the FY22 budget was aligned to our strategic priorities outlined in the strategic vision. All departments are required to submit work plans that demonstrate how they'll follow through on our commitments to our students and families. This spring, we will launch a public dashboard and annual report that provides transparency around our progress to date. Again, another way that we cultivate trust. Next slide, please. And here I'll briefly say that we remain just as committed to our opportunity and achievement gaps policy, as Chief Cooter mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, and our dashboard will also track our alignment to the implementation of the OAG policy, as this is our most critical and urgent work in meeting the goals of the policy, which is also our strategic vision to ensure that every child in every classroom and every school gets what they need. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to Chief Cooter.
Thank you. As we start this budget presentation, again, we want to emphasize the $36 million commitment. This is part of a 3-year, $100 million commitment that the city has made to the Boston Public Schools that allows us to really focus on our path to recovery for our students and for our district. We are in an incredibly strong financial position, and as the superintendent mentioned, this is unique for urban school districts. It's unique for school districts across the country. At a time when other mayors are expecting dramatic cuts to school budgets, if not for the federal relief package. We're going to progress towards our goals with this commitment from the city. And I believe that this makes Boston unique and it stands apart from other cities in its commitment to education. We thank you and thank the city for this partnership. This is a big deal, and it's taking a significant commitment from the city during a period of financial instability for our community. As we work to rapidly recover, and reimagine, the superintendent is leveraging 3 sources of financial resources to fulfill her vision for our students. When used thoughtfully, these 3 sources of funds represent a tremendous opportunity for our students to make and for us to make lasting change in our district. The first source of funding, of course, is our operating budget, or what we refer to as our general funds. This is funding directly from the city. The second source of funding is federal, and BPS is set to receive an estimated $393 million that can be used from fiscal year 22 next year through fiscal year 24. This includes both the education ESSER 2 funding, which is $123 million, and then an estimated amount for the Biden administration's relief package, where we're estimating an additional $270 million. Throughout this presentation, we're going to highlight different investments that are talked about both from the operating side, what we're planning to do with city funds, and then also how we're planning to use those federal funds, because we thought it would be disjointed to really just talk about city funds when overall we have a financial picture that is much different. The last source of fund, of course, is our capital budget. The city is presenting the capital budget to you on Thursday, but we are looking at across the three sources of fund, how we can improve our facilities, how we can improve our academic experience for students. As we evaluate how to use our resources, we're focused on how to make sure those investments that we have will make an impact beyond a single year. It can be easy to spend this money quickly. What we want to do is spend it thoughtfully and make sure that whatever we're doing, we're building for a sustainable future that again focuses on recovering for students and getting resources to students quickly, but is also very deliberate in how we address and support our long-term fiscal outlook and educational needs of our students. As I mentioned, the federal funding comes in a couple different parts. We've talked about ESSER Part 1 funding, which is CARES Act funding. That happened this year. This was the $32 million that we received. We also received an additional $23 million that was part of the city's CARES allocation. And so this year we were benefiting from an additional $50 million in federal funds, either directly or through the city. ESSER Part 2 funding is eligible for fiscal year 22 through 23. That's the $123 million that I mentioned. And then an estimated $270 million from President Biden's stimulus bill, which includes funding that goes beyond to fiscal year 24. I want to briefly again talk about our framework that we have really focused on. And throughout the presentation, you're going to see three key areas talking about return, recover, and reimagine. And at this point, I'd like to introduce our new Chief of Accountability, Ava Mitchell, who will walk us through the framework that we're using around federal funding.
All right, so Dr. Caselius, our superintendent, has already provided an introduction about her vision for return, recovery, and reimagine that will be elevated to the next level with the introduction of the new federal investments that our CFO just described. What I will share with you a little bit is about how we are planning to carry out that vision on her behalf. So as Dr. Granson, our Chief Equity and Strategy Officer, described, this all started with the superintendent's community tour and her community-driven strategic plan that was developed as a result to meet the needs that were identified. And under Chief Granson's leadership, we have implemented a disciplined internal process where we are ensuring execution through work plans and a monitoring system. And we are elevating public transparency to the next level with the introduction of the dashboards and public transparency and accountability through our community equity roundtables. I say this to say that these are the foundational elements that the superintendent has put in place so that we can launch things to the next level. And as our CFO described, another aspect of the foundational components that she's put in place is this really smart budgeting with aligned budget processes so that our CFO and our Chief Equity and Strategy Officer, and when I was there as Charles's deputy, I'm supporting him on that. I'm really working on making sure that our dollars were aligned to our plans and we were monitoring to make sure that we were receiving the outcomes so that our investments would be really well used and we would know what we were accomplishing based on the expenditures of both our time, our efforts, and our dollars. Well, now, based on that strong foundation that she has built, through these parallel efforts of financial management to attain our strategic plan, now we have this unprecedented opportunity with the introduction of about $400 million in federal funds that BPS is applying for the next that will carry us out for the next 3 years. Now, as we go into the next stage, see if you can go to the next slide. We are introducing at the superintendent's direction and lead a Return, Recover, and Reimagine Commission. This commission has been thoughtfully comprised of school committee members, city hall representatives, Boston Public School administrators, educators, parent and student representatives, city civil rights leaders, student advocates, business, philanthropy, faith-based leadership, and higher education. And their goal will be using the strategic plan as a guide and building on the foundational elements that we have already put in place. Now, establishing a new vision for what the ceiling looks like and breaking through that so that we can reimagine the school district free from some of the traditional assumptions that we have had to presume in the past due to constraints. We have our first meeting on May 13. As Dr. Caselli has mentioned, they will be public meetings, and we will have public comment after. And on July 1st, that is when we are finalizing our plan for public comment, our draft plan for public comment, so that we can submit our Return, Recover, and Reimagine plan to the state for our federal funding proposal.
Thank you so much, Chief Mitchell. I'm going to now take some time to dive a little bit deeper into some of the specifics in our Return, Recover, and Reimagine plan and what's in our FY22 budget. So as we've mentioned, the first focus in our budget and in our work is to return well by getting all students and staff back into buildings, as we are doing and excited to have been doing this week full time. And then really focusing on getting back to work and the work that we love so that we can return even stronger. In order to do this, we've posed the following questions and have obviously started to think about these already as we're reopening right now. What will it take to reopen schools safely for all students and continue to keep them open? What COVID response investments will need to continue beyond this year? And what work did we start that was, or do we need to restart that was paused due to COVID? So our first priority here starts with ensuring that both our physical space is ready and safe for our students' return, and that we're set up to maintain that safe environment for the upcoming fiscal year. In order to provide clean building conditions, we're adding 20 custodians to our schools, as Dr. Caselli spoke about earlier. We're also increasing funding towards existing maintenance contracts so that we can provide facilities improvements that our students deserve. Additionally, we have set aside funding to continue implementing cleaning protocols established during COVID, such as installation of hand sanitizer, provision of PPE that we see as essential for continuing, bus sanitization, and other things like that. Because we know that these protocols will last long after COVID ends. Finally, we know that being able to regularly test and maintain air quality is essential to staff and student safety now and ongoing. And so we have set aside funds to ensure that that continues as well. Equally, if not more important than physical space, is the physical health of our students. The proposed investments in FY22 build upon past investments in school nurses that have led us to our current team of 159 nurses and 6 health paraprofessionals, all of whom continue to play a critical role in ensuring students and staff are returning safely to school. Our investments for FY22 will allow us to increase our nursing coverage and be more flexible with the coverage that we provide, and also to support the team through professional development and to build a strong administrative team within our nursing and health services department that is reflective of the cultural and linguistic diversity of our district. It will also allow us to continue our work to provide BPS employees access to vaccines and regular testing for staff and students for as long as we need to do that. Other investments in return will focus on continuing our efforts to provide internet access and technology for BPS students and families. Along with this, we will take the learnings from the platforms that we have seen work well this year, such as Talking Points, which supports communication and translations for students and families, and we'll be able to access and expand access to them going into next year. This year, we have also seen our investments in one-on-one computing for students take on roles that we never could have imagined just 1 year ago. And this budget ensures that we are able to continue providing this technology going forward. Our focus for Recover is to ensure that school communities have what they need to not only repair the damage done by COVID-19, but also to create the conditions in which students and families can thrive. In order to do this, we see it as essential to both provide stability to school communities despite declining enrollment, and to invest in social, emotional, and family supports. Last year, we laid out our vision for the FY21 proposal focused on improving what Richard Elmore first referred to as the Instructional Core. The Instructional Core has 3 ingredients: the teacher and the student in the presence of content. It is the relationship between these 3, not the qualities of any one of them by themselves, that determines the quality of and extent of learning. Our FY22 budget not only sets us up to maintain the foundation that we have established in this instructional core through our investment in maintaining level supports to schools, but it also seeks to go far beyond maintenance towards moving us towards our vision of reimagining. We know that within this core, the path to recovery begins by returning to and strengthening 3 basic strategies. Increasing knowledge and skills of teachers through investment in meaningful, culturally and linguistically sustaining school cultures and time for authentic collaboration. Ensuring high quality, culturally and linguistically sustaining curricular materials. And altering the relationship of the student to the content and teacher through increased opportunities for individualized and out of school time learning. We also know, as the framework that I just showed alludes to, that classrooms and these 3 pieces don't exist in a vacuum. Students are supported and influenced by families and communities. Teachers need support and work within structures of our schools and our district. And content must be supported by instructional frameworks and professional development to ensure it is successfully leveraged. For that reason, as part of Recover, we have proposed an acceleration of our rollout of supports for students and families and community by investing in additional family liaisons at every school and additional social worker positions for next year. These investments, combined with our nursing investments, will be critical components to a broader hub schools model that supports school communities in responding rapidly to student and family needs and coordinating supports across schools. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Cooter to speak about our Reimagine work.
As we come into the home stretch of our presentation, we want to talk about Reimagine, what's possible for our students. And the superintendent mentioned at the opening that this is a once in a generation type of opportunity with both the commitment from the city, a commitment around capital, and then extensive and significant federal funds. We want to have an opportunity about what it means to reimagine our schools and not come back to the same schools we had before, but come back to a district that is better prepared to serve our students and to provide them with the opportunities that they need. And this is really the start of the conversation. As the superintendent mentioned, we launched the commission this morning, and are excited about doing this collectively with the community to make sure we feel that people who are closest to the students are those that are best able to identify what is going to take to recover from this pandemic. We've talked about launching the work into reimagining it for a district in a few different areas. Thinking about facilities and learning environments and what we need to do to accelerate the conversations around the schools that we need to serve our students. We need to be thinking more inclusively about how to create classrooms that can serve any student and not segregating our students based on ability or disability or language status. What we want to do is create those opportunities for students to thrive. We have an opportunity with the Look Act to reimagine English learner programs and the funding to be able to go along with that. And then finally, we are committed to making sure that there are school-based investments that also allow for schools to think about reimagining their practices, reimagining the structures that have gotten in the way of their success, and think about it as a collective, as a region. So schools coming together and working together. We've seen pockets of this success in, of course, Grove Hall, and in Roxbury, some of our school leaders who are very close and work well together. What we want to be able to do is foster that kind of collaboration and innovation because it's about serving the students in our community, making sure that we have great schools throughout the city. Of course, we are at the start of the budget process with the City Council, but we have been going through this process with the school committee throughout this spring. So I want to point people to the resources that we have online. All of our presentations from the school committee process starting back in February have been posted online and have been translated in all major languages. Our budget documents, including the detailed budget by account, program, and department, which shows how we manage our budget, are also available online and have also been translated in all major languages. And we also have the Boston Public Schools /budget, where you can download a ton of resources, as well as bostonpublicschools.org/explore budget. This is a tool for those of you who really want to dive into our budget and know the details. It shows every dollar, how it's allocated to schools, and then how it's broken down by activity and how many students are served by the activity. So you can go into the finance department and find out how we split our budget and how we serve students with that budget. And of course, as I mentioned before, and since I know Councilor Mejia is going to ask me, all of these documents have been translated and available in the 9 most prevalent languages in the Boston Public Schools. And finally, as I mentioned, we're kickstarting this City Council process. To our many fans who want to see us at all of our tour dates, here you can find them starting today. We have 2 hearings throughout the end of May, and we look forward to diving into different topics, all aligned to our strategic plan. As we start to reimagine, we are grounding ourselves again in the work that we did prior to the outbreak of COVID-19. And that is the framework for how we will be presenting. Many of my colleagues will be coming and presenting and giving a deep dive on each of these topics. With that, I will turn it back over to Chairman Bach for your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Nate, and to the whole team for the presentation. I want to acknowledge we were also joined by Councilor Lydia Edwards since I last read the list. And we will jump straight into questions. I think I'll hold mine to the end and let my Vice Chair and the Chair of Education, Councilor Asabi George, lead off.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the superintendent and her team for a very thorough and thoughtful presentation. I'll just give a couple of brief remarks and then get into a couple of, I think, overarching questions, just at least for this round. As you all know, as an at-large city councilor, as a mother and a former teacher in the Boston Public Schools, I reflected very specifically on my priorities through my work and my personal experiences, and would like to just share a few of the things I'll be advocating for throughout this FY22 budget process. And also want to note some of these things I'm very happy to see in today's presentation and have been included through the school departments budget process that happened earlier this year. I believe that every child in Boston should have access to school-based professionals that will account for their emotional, mental, and physical health. And we know that we need to ensure that there is a minimum of a full-time nurse, a school psychologist, counselor, and family liaison in each one of our schools. And I'm happy to see the increased investment in some of these providers in our schools. We do need to make sure that we have enough professionals available in order to fulfill our obligation to our students with individualized education plans, and know that we need providers that are both doing the evaluation and providing appropriate services. Our children deserve to be in schools that provide them with all they need in order to have a successful and fulfilling experience. And that's certainly in addition to their academics. We talk a lot about their social and emotional well-being and opportunities to participate in athletics and to engage in other enrichments throughout the course of their time in school with us. I also will continue to strongly advocate for the resources and basic services that all of our schools should already have. Those things for me include a fully stocked library with a range of materials for all ages and full-time librarians, suitably sized science labs with all of the appropriate scientific tools and resources they need to effectively and efficiently and productively engage in that curriculum. Art and music classes belong certainly in our schools, and we need to have the necessary spaces as well as teachers for those subjects. We also need to provide our students with access to clean water and functioning water fountains in all of our school buildings. And we need to ensure that all of our schools have bathrooms that are clean, safe, gender affirming, and stocked with the supplies and menstrual products our students need. With today's touch on the Build BPS plan, we need to ensure that the remaining sum of money is used thoughtfully and for the strict purpose of improving our school buildings and ensuring that we are keeping an eco-friendly mindset. And I will continue to push BPS to release a timeline and offer a budget outline for the monies that are remaining, as well as a plan to invest further, as we know that this $1 billion, although a large dollar amount, will not get through all of our school buildings for sure. And then Madison Park Vocational Technical High School, the city's only Voc Tech high school, needs to receive a significant amount of programmatic and facilities investments. We must continue increasing that direct funding, developing and implementing an appropriate admissions policy, and strengthening partnerships, especially with our trade unions, our large institutions, and some of our businesses. We see as that the workforce needs change, that what we're doing at Madison should also change. Our youth deserve employment opportunities throughout the year in order to gain that work experience, to grow professionally, and to develop skills. We need to invest in year-long employment for our youth and for our city. Increase access to post-graduation planning for seniors, including college preparatory resources, internships, and externships, trade school resources, and extensive employment opportunities. Our schools certainly play a role in that, especially at the secondary level. Early education, we know, is crucial for the development of our children, and there is a high demand for pre-K seats in our city, and we'll continue to do that work to advocate for an increase in funding for universal pre-K and to work in, I think, closer partnership with our child care providers across the city. I know that my time is near, so I do want to make sure that I get to a couple of bigger questions, and I've got a list, so I'll use a couple of rounds today and save some of the in-the-weeds ones for future hearings. But as it relates to my comment on the Build BPS plan, I am curious if we could just talk a little bit, maybe Nate could talk about the current level of spending, where we are, what the timeline is, and what opportunities we have for additional investments in our facilities.
So go ahead.
Sorry.
No, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So we are planning a school committee presentation on our capital projects that are currently in place with the current Build PPS. You mentioned clean water counselor. This is something that we were able to secure $10 million from the city capital budget from previously in the previous budget, as well as we applied for and got a $6 million grant from the federal government for clean water and refillable stations. So that project is going to start this summer. And we'll continue to do that for over the next 3 years so that every single Boston Public Schools has clean water. So super proud of that work. So I wanted to make sure I just made that clear. And there's additional upgrades that's happening with our capital planning, as well as some of our major renovations and rebuilds. But we'll be ready to talk more about that in the next couple of weeks. I don't know if you have anything else.
When is that presentation to school committee on Build BPS?
I believe it's the middle of June. I don't have the exact dates right in front, or middle of May. I don't have the exact presentation date of the school committee. Maybe Megan has it.
Yeah, it's May 12th is the planned presentation to Build BPS to the school committee, and I believe Build BPS is also the focus topic of another hearing later.
So I guess my question is, are we one? So I look forward to that hearing for us in the presentation to school committee on Build BPS. Are we also engaged in conversations or some creative thinking around additional resources, financial resources for what I would say, I think might be Build BPS 3.0. When we think about, because this, I think is 2.0, thinking about the next $1 billion.
Absolutely. So we are thinking about where do we go with larger renovations. What we'll be presenting will be more about the process for how we move forward with a new Build BPS 3.0 ask that we want to make of the city. We just need a chance to meet with Mayor Janey and her team around some of the investments, talk with Justin Starrett, the new CFO for the city, and make sure that we're in line with, what's available in terms of our targets of how big and bold we can actually go around some of this work.
Great. Thank you. I see the gavel, and Nate, I know I interrupted you partly through some of your response.
Yeah, I think the superintendent said it well. I think what you're going to see in the presentation is we're going to be announcing new school buildings. We're going to be announcing how we plan to use our existing buildings differently. And then we're also going to be talking about how do we upgrade buildings for students in the meantime, right? So what we have not done is had a predictable school building program that we are getting back on track for. And in the meantime, we're going to be looking for ways to upgrade all schools in the areas that you've mentioned already around arts, around science. And so how do we create a coordinated program that doesn't focus only on the minor upgrades and never gets to major buildings, and then also doesn't focus on only major builds and ignores the fact that those take often too long for existing students to benefit from them. So that balance that we need as a city is going to be reflected. I'm excited to talk more about it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Sabi George. Councillor Flynn was here for the presentation, but had to leave right at the end. So he's holding his questions for now. But next up is going to be Councillor Wu, and then Councillor Campbell, and then Councillor Braden. And I just want to note that we've also been joined by Councillor Ricardo Arroyo from District 5 and Councillor Michael Flaherty at large. So Councillor Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone. I apologize. I'm in a little bit of a noisy space in transit, so I'm going to just ask the two main questions I had all together and get into details at future sessions. But I had, similarly to Councillor Sabi George, one question on facilities, which I think I share a lot of her concerns, but I'll frame it in a more specific way of so many of the conversations that we had during the pandemic about schools and reopening were related to the fact that our facilities fall short when it comes, had come to HVAC and air ventilation and sort of so many of these basic health and safety issues. Will we, after this summer, have seen basically a resolution of those issues with this infusion of federal funds and the time that the buildings will be open during the summer? And then my second question was on the family liaisons investment, and what are, if you could just give a little more detail into the specific ways that family liaisons will be thinking, what will their role look like specifically, the usual responsibilities they had, but then now also thinking about pandemic and mental health for students and families and the recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Yes, we opened up our schools 5 days a week this past Monday. We're very proud of the work that we've been doing with our facilities team, and our custodial team have just been wonderful. We wouldn't have been able to open our doors if we didn't feel that our buildings were safe and healthy places for our children to be and our staff to be. So we think that we've gotten our facilities into a good place. We had 7,500 air purifiers we put in place. Every single school that could put in place that had HVAC for MERV 13s have MERV 13s in them. We've done air quality testing in all of our schools. We've replaced 7,000 or repaired 7,000 windows, and we'll continue to repair those windows. I think we had 12,000 identified out of the 27,000 windows that we have. So a lot of good work has been going in place. That does not replace what Councilor Asabi George was talking about, which is, our kids need libraries, they need adequate cafeteria space. As you know, we put up tents recently so that students would have the additional spacing to be able to take masks down and to eat. So we do have some of that work yet to do. Gymnasiums, auditoriums, science labs. Those are things that are going to take a much larger commitment on the capital side in terms of some of the planning that I think Nate is going to bring forward. But today we're here talking about our operational budget, and our operational budget is very different than our capital budget and our capital ask of the city. As for the family liaisons are doing work directly with families around housing, around food access, around crisis, mental health supports, helping them navigate the system, access Parent University and other ways to engage their children if they're still in the remote environment. So family liaisons, the new family liaisons will be available to adjust their hours. They won't be tied to the normal calendar and hours of a typical BTU. We had to negotiate that with our BTU partners to be able to have these positions available to families when families need them. So we're very excited about the family liaison positions. We're very excited that there'll be a diverse representation and multilingual. So that's a huge strategy to us to providing the wraparound services that we need to provide to families during this time of pandemic, especially. I don't know if you have any.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess just as a quick follow-up, in terms of what will happen this summer, as last summer was a lot of wins and all the work that your team worked so hard to get done. What does this summer look like with the funding, with the time that the buildings will be vacant? Is the district going to be pushing into any particular set of facilities investments? And I only ask this now because I know there's many more sessions and conversations both with the school committee and the council on this piece, but it feels like to get things going in time for summer, probably their plans have to be at least started, or if not completely, most of the way there now. So just curious what you're thinking about the opportunity we have to really get in there while schools are closed for the summer.
Yeah, good question. So we'll have our additional normal cleaning that they do in the summer because students are back now. So custodians will be very busy doing their normal cleaning of the school buildings. And then also we have the kitchen projects that will be getting finished this summer, as well as the bathroom projects that have been ongoing, and then replacements or repair of windows that will continue. And also we will start our water project. So those projects will all be going on this summer. But again, our buildings won't be empty. We have a pretty robust summer program that we'll be doing in summer learning in over 50 of our buildings, not to mention the enrichment programs that we'll be partnering with Boston After School and Beyond on, where they will also be using some of our facilities and buildings. We want to make sure our children are engaged, that they're reconnecting and rebuilding community, and that they're very busy this summer. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Wu. I think we'll actually go next to Councillor Braden and then Councillor Campbell, and then it'll be Councillor Baker after her. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the team for a very thorough presentation. I had some questions. Being a district councillor, I will obviously focus on the schools in our district and in District 9. I'm really excited about the commitment to hub schools. And I was just wondering, I really feel that our hub school, the GPA, the Gardner Pilot Academy, did a great job this year, working in partnership with the YMCA to set up learning pods that were located in one of our local nonprofits. So I think it was a very successful model. I'm just wondering about, the partnership with the GP and the YMCA. It's half of your hub schools partner with the YMCA. I'd really like to get more details about those partnerships, and is it facilitated at the local level, or is it through the central office of the YMCA? One concern of parents is with childcare, programming, is what's the turnover of staff? Do you have a fairly stable staff in the hub school model from the YMCA side, just to make sure that you have some continuity of care and the stable learning situation for after preschool and after school, before school and after school programs in a hub school? I had a question about the Horace Mann. It's a school for the deaf. It's a dual language school. I'm really interested to hear of your plans for the relocation of that school, and also how its status as a dual language school will impact those plans. The deaf culture and the deaf community in Alston, Brighton. The location in Union Square in Alston is closely associated with the deafing program across the street, and I'm just really thinking about what the plans are for the deaf school. Then also there's huge questions about the future of the Jackson Mann Elementary School. It's slated to close next July 22. I understand it's a long glide path. I don't think we can pull a plan out of a hat in short notice, and I really hope that we can step up our conversation about the plans for what's going to happen when those schools close, the schools plural, and also the relationship with the Jackson Mann schools, the schools at Jackson Mann site, and their relationship with the BCYF, which provides preschool, after-school programs, adult education, etc. I really hope that we can have a big conversation on how the intersectionality of the BCYF programming and the BPS programming. Sometimes it can get to be a little, with shared facilities. It's not always a smooth situation, but I hope that we can really engage in a visioning process that would envision the reestablishment of the Jackson Mann as a top-notch hub school in partnership with BCYF at that location. I had a question about the locker rooms at Brighton High School. There's a significant amount of money put aside for lockers, new locker rooms at Brighton High. I do remember that was in last year's budget. So is it just rolled forward from last year, or why is it in this year's budget? It was just we didn't get to it with COVID last year, and it's just been put into this year's budget. And let's see, what else? Yeah, those are really, and really the other issue is really strong career pathways. I know this is an issue that Superintendent Casilius is very strong on, is really just to look at career pathways for all of our high schoolers. Notwithstanding the need for strong programming and support in Madison Park, but we also need career pathways and internships, etc., for our high schoolers and across the city. Thank you. Those are really the main points. I look forward to digging deeper into this big conversation as we go through the budget in the coming weeks. And thank you all for your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And from many of the questions that I've been getting from counselors, you like me have a lot of concerns around our facilities and where we're headed with our capital budget. And again, today's hearing is mostly on operations and our operational budget. And so I think it'd probably be best to come back to the team on the capital budget and the capital plan after we present to school committee, I think, so that we can answer all of your questions around capital. I know that the Brighton High School locker room is on the piece. We are still working with the Horseman community. We are collectively still looking for Jackson Man and the solutions there, and we'll be coming around with a question. No doubt the YMCA has been an incredible partner to us this year and is a major partner with us on our Hub Community School model. And so we're doing great work with them. ONS has just recently announced the reopening of their neighborhood centers. So we're really excited to partner with them in all new ways to be able to make sure that students have their out of school and before school time taken care of, and that they have a place to play and to engage and to get the kind of help that they need for their remote learning experience if they're still in remote learning. So all of those things really important into the budget. I think we'll see some of the capital improvements, some of the improvements around arts education and athletics and PE and science and career pathways be part of this investment to create a more equitable BPS and our $400 million as we do the next couple months of planning and listen to the community.
Thank you. Madam Chair, that's all I have for now.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. Next up is Councillor Campbell and then Councillor Baker. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, and thanks for being flexible as my power went out. So it is back. Thank goodness. Thank you, Superintendent, and of course, your entire team for the presentation. Also look forward to, of course, the budget hearings that are specific in subject matter to ask more specific questions. But I will be, of course, asking questions about how we get our kids not only back in person, but also the plan for the fall, because there's still some concerns from parents that it may not happen, even though we're transitioning, of course, our kids in person right now. How we, of course, make up for lost time and the mental health challenges our students face, along with our educators. Universal pre-K. I had a hearing recently, a very robust hearing that included folks from BPS, the administration, but also the external partners that do this work in this childcare ecosystem. So really looking at how the city BPS can explore more development of programming from birth to 3. How we, of course, make the 4-year-old access to seats for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds actually happen, 5-year-olds as well. So real robust hearing on birth to 5 years old and how the city of Boston can lead the way in terms of providing universal pre-K. So we'll have questions around that. Our school facilities, which of course I think every counselor is going to bring up. Obviously, we're looking to have a meeting soon on the Greenwood School. What can we do to support those families and parents right now that have real issues with the infrastructure that they currently have that isn't working, isn't safe, and frankly, where I wouldn't send my own child to? How do we make sure that they have adequate infrastructure temporarily while we, of course, accelerate projects to improve the facilities of our schools? Looking forward to conversations around the federal dollars and how those are being invested. English learners have a hearing on that, and we'll continue to think about how do we expand programming, of course, for English learners, which has been a topic of discussion for a long time. Our special needs students, the same thing. Questions around investment in curriculum, of course, in technology and the digital divide. Madison Park, but not just Madison Park, high school redesign and the development of pathways into just development of more pathways for our students will be a lot of questions for me on that. School resource officers and how we look at our school discipline policies and practices within our school buildings to change those processes and to remove school resource officers and have greater investment in, I will say, school counselors, mental health professionals, guidance counselors. This has been a topic of discussion for a really long time. In touch, of course, with many of the folks on your team with respect to this issue, because I do think it needs to happen in partnership with school resource officers, and that there are real not just studies, but I'm a former education attorney who handled a lot of disciplinary cases. How we criminalize young people at the school level is real. So how do we respond to that effectively? And then lastly, we'll have a lot of questions on the Boston Public Schools transportation budget, alternatives to save money for a budget that is just not, of course, sustainable. So my quick questions before I think we go on to the next thing, I was just wanting to give an overview for you and your team, is one, is there any acceleration of capital projects happening right now in terms of school infrastructure, given that interest rates are so low? And clearly there's been some projects in the pipeline for some time. How do we make that happen? The other piece, or the other question is around, I just lost my train of thought. I just lost my train of thought. We'll start there and then it'll come back to me.
I hate when that happens too, Counselor.
I know.
But you've outlined a lot of what's on my to-do list, and just be mindful of list. And so I appreciate all that you're thinking about, especially with.
It came back to me.
Okay.
Sorry. So the acceleration of capital projects, given interest rates are so low, and I think we could be just doing these things right now and as a way to even help people get back to work. So anything there. And then the second piece was around what Nate brought up in terms of declining enrollment and the thousands of families and students we're losing. I think the district and the city for a long time has had a Band-Aid response. It's a tough conversation to have, but what is a strategy and plan to address declining enrollment? Some folks refer to it as right-sizing this district, but what is the plan given that we're not headed on a sustainable trajectory, given that decline in enrollment? Those are my two questions, Councillor Bach, and then I can save things for the next rounds. Thank you.
Lots of good questions. One, the Biden funding is actually intended to be more like a stimulus. So it is intended for us to be able to accelerate projects and get people jobs and to get the economy back on its feet. And so they'll be looking for that kind of effort within our proposals. And so that's in the back of my mind as we think about it. Two, in terms of declining enrollment, this is something that does have a cyclical effect, and it just, keeps going down if you don't interrupt it. Part of that solution is around universal pre-kindergarten and ensuring that parents have an entryway into the district and strong pathways. So getting our pathways solidified is critical. Part of that is on the capital budget that we'll be talking about with the school committee in May. And so that's really important. So I look forward to coming back and circling around with that all the way from birth to career. And so making sure that we're paying attention to all of that. The current projects that are accelerated right now in our capital budget are Boston's Arts Academy. We're finishing that. We have the Quincy School that's in design phase, the Carter School as well. Those are three major projects. We've just recently closed the Edwards School, and we have the Jackson Mann, as Councillor Braden was talking about, and Horace Mann School. We have our middle schools that will be having to come offline and repurposed for additional projects. And we'll be working with the community around all of this. So this is an opportunity for us to refresh and renew and revitalize. And so that's where our effort will mostly be as we look to strengthen our pathways to create more access for our younger learners, and then the pathways at 712 to provide better and more equitable and robust opportunities at the high school level so we can improve all of our high schools across the city. So that's the general idea.
I didn't know about the Edwards. So that's
the Edwards has been transitioning for the last 2 years.
Yep.
So we didn't put a sixth grade at the Edwards prior year. And then now they're moving on because the Charlestown High School will have the 7th and 8th grade, and East Boston will have 7th grade because we did the K-6 expansions in East Boston. And so really important for us to continue that work around expanding our K-5s to K-6, and our schools that are 9-12. Some of them are going to be going 7-12. We will still have some K-8s and some 9-12 high schools as well.
We'll continue. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bach.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Campbell. Next up, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councillor Campbell. It's nice to see somebody else lose their train of thought other than me. Just a couple things. Nate, you had talked about the student enrollment again. So can you explain a little more on who it is we're losing? Is it how many kids are graduating and then it's not coming in the lower grades, or is there an exodus in middle school? And who are those children, families that are leaving?
Well, Nate, before you go, I just want to say, one, we had a low dropout rate last year and the highest graduation rates. So I want to make sure that you don't think that we had a dropout rate last year with the class.
No, that's not what I'm saying. The kids that graduated, they're obviously off. They come down. You minus them off the 57,000 or whatever our number is now, and then. But is it kids not coming in at the beginning, or are we bleeding in the middle? And again, during COVID, I know we lost some families to Catholic schools because they were open. Is that a trend that we're going to see more of, or can you just maybe talk about that enrollment a little bit, who it is, where they're going?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you offering the opportunity for me to clarify for you. The first is, generally speaking, it's that we are not getting new students enrolling in the district is a bigger factor than students who are leaving the district. We have seen that parochial school enrollment has increased this year, but it's not just enrollment from BPS, it's also enrollment from charter schools who also did not open fully in person this year at the start. The data that we get around parochial and charter school enrollment doesn't come to us until this spring. So we will have our first deep dive analysis of that coming over the summer. But so a lot of our information is just trying to track our enrollment. I would say immigration policies is a big factor. And so we did not see as many new arriving students. So we had a bigger decline in English learners this year. Because new students are not arriving in Boston. We think that could have to do with the former administration's xenophobic policies, or it could be
Nate, what would that number account for? Like for new immigrant students, what 400, 500 kids a year maybe, or less?
No, it can be. I can pull up the exact number, but yeah, it can be more than that.
Really?
And it's pretty significant, the number of new students, new arrivals that we have. The other two things that you did mention is that we did have a large graduating class last year that is not being replaced by a class that size. This is the fourth year of high school enrollment decline because those smaller cohorts are going from 9th to 10th and aging out. That's something that we see in Boston, in Massachusetts, and the region as a whole, that the current class that are freshmen in college was a much bigger cohort of kids than the classes that have followed them. And then, of course, as you mentioned, we are seeing declining enrollment in the early grades, K1, K2, first grade. That is the place where we are least certain that it's not COVID related. I might have thrown it.
Do we have a sense of what we can attribute that to?
We don't. I mean, oftentimes with a lot of this enrollment, we don't have a lot of the qualitative data that we would need to be able to estimate what's happening. All we can sort of do is provide greater clarity about what we see. And so we see less enrollment in K1, K2, first grade than we've seen. And then we are holding a lot of capacity. So Miriam mentioned, Superintendent mentioned, that we're doing $18.5 million in new investments to support schools. What we have done is not close classrooms and programs across the city so that we have the capacity to serve students if and when they return in the fall. So if we do see that there was a 1-year decrease because it was COVID related and that students begin to enroll, then we have the capacity to serve them. If those students do not come back, that it was partially COVID or it was COVID and then they, once they enroll in a parochial school, they stay in parochial school in perpetuity. If that happens, then we will have to accelerate the conversations that Councillor Campbell was mentioning, which is how do we sort of have the right footprint, the right size district, and the right number of elementary schools and programs to be able to serve our students, so that the programs that we have are fully funded and sustainable going forward for many years to come.
Yeah, that was actually the second part of my question, was maybe talk about footprint a bit. It's on slide 24. So if these numbers stay the same, footprint would mean potential closings or just changing.
Yeah,
that's a difficult. I don't want to really throw you in that fire right there, but if you can talk about footprint a little bit and what we see of in the next couple of years.
Yeah, so the big thing that we've been talking about for a few years, and we announced at the last phase, 2.0 of Build BPS, was that we are phasing out all of our standalone middle schools. Yeah. And so what you can expect to see is a timeline around the remaining standalone middle schools, so that we can begin to reconfigure those. That's about using our existing buildings to better match students. The way that benefits us is we see as a pro-enrollment strategy, to use one of the superintendent's terms, the pro-enrollment strategy is we see already an uptick in retention of students, meaning we keep our BPS students in the K-6 elementary schools, and that we see students who are enrolling in those 7 to 12s as a popular option. So we anticipate that as a more popular pathway for families, and we will benefit from that. The other piece that we are going to be talking about is how do we want to use those middle school buildings, because we're planning to use them all as BPS buildings. We're not selling them off for condos. We're taking them, making major reinvestments to upgrade them and make sure that they are new modern facilities, as Councillor Sabi George mentioned, needing libraries and science labs and all of the different pieces to it. Then using those for elementary schools in high needs areas, where we can then potentially look at expanding and merging two communities into a brand new building. We have in the past talked about mergers, not from a position of strength. We've talked about it in terms of responding to declining enrollment. But when families have the opportunity to go to a new building, it's a more exciting opportunity. So we may be looking that. And that could be ways that we start to right size where families feel like they're gaining from the consolidation, as opposed to losing these sort of tiny school communities that we're struggling to fully fund.
So
resources.
Thank you, Nate. That brings me to my next question there on the page. I think it was maybe slide 22. I think it was mentioned on the hub schools. I didn't see any mention of the Devon McCormick campus there. I know there's talk of that becoming a hub campus. Is that just because the rehab or the redesign of that campus is not quite ready to go yet? When will we start all that?
Yeah, the McCormick BCLA McCormick 7 through 12 school begins. They've officially voted to merge, and they will begin next year to begin transitioning. So 7th through 9th grade will be at the McCormick facility next year, and 10 through 12 will be at the Hyde Park complex where they are. And we are beginning the process. It's a 3-phased upgrade to facilities, specifically around the BCLA McCormick 7 through 12. And then in addition, there's...
Nate, I'm sorry, it's a 3, you cut out when you say it's a 3.
Yeah, sorry, it's a 3-phase project.
Yeah.
The first is making renovations that are needed so it's sort of like table stakes, basic renovations first, and then we're upgrading over 3 years and 3 phases of the project. The other piece is we have a partnership with UMass Boston to do some work around those pathways. That's a little bit different from the hub schools model, in that the hub schools model is about social emotional supports. And I know that there's already a lot of community partners at the McCormick and at BCLA already. So it's sort of the formal hub implementation that's being piloted and rolled out at a subset of schools next year versus the schools that do it already. As Councilor Braden, you referred to some of the schools doing it on their own. And then there's going to be some great partnerships and pathways that are going to come out of the partnership with UMass Boston that we're very excited about.
But what about the partnership with the Boys and Girls Club over there?
That project is moving forward as well, and access to the facilities is something that is going to be part of that that process. They've been going through that public process as well, and so that's definitely something that is going to be an exciting opportunity for our students there. Is that
so is that campus slated for a hub school model? Is that the idea over there? We don't really know yet.
It's not in the initial phase of the hub school. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be. And I would just say partnerships are an important part of every BPS school. And so being formal part of the hub school initiative versus not doesn't mean that it's all connected to the community or not. There's a lot of partnership and community resources that are being brought into BCLA McCormick.
Okay, I'm getting the gavel. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Next up, Councillor Mejia, and then it'll be Councillor Arroyo and Flaherty. Councillor Mejia? Councillor Mejia?
Yes, sorry. My time starts now, okay? And I have a lot of questions, so I'm not even going to do opening remarks. I'm just curious. I'm going to dive right into the commission. Dr. Casilius, I reached out to you last week in regards to this new task force that was put in place, and I've gotten a lot of calls from groups who are interested in knowing just kind of how that was chosen. They're curious to know what the percentage of parents are and students that make up that space. We also want to ensure that that we're following their advice and feedback. And folks are really concerned about the lip service, just curious about what that's going to look like in terms of outcomes. And they also want to know what the vision is beyond the commission. In other words, how will it be implemented for beyond, once the information is determined, what role will the community play in terms of just monitoring the implementation of that? And a lot of these questions came from the folks at School Facts. It's a nonprofit organization working with parents and students. So if you could answer that, that would be great. Some of my other questions come from educators and parents, specifically around the trauma-informed practices. I see that you mentioned in the presentation. We'd like for you to just kind of expand a little bit on that. Beyond staffing levels for social workers, what does trauma-informed care really look like in the classroom? More specifically, we'd like to know how many school social workers and psychologists will be employed if this budget passes, how and where will they be staffed, and how will they be prioritized in the most impacted schools and communities. We also would like to know what are the plans in place to support families and students over the summer in terms of mental health and enrichment. I'm also curious about what trauma-informed practices are being offered for teachers, administrators, and parents. This pandemic has been stressful for them too, so would love to get your feedback on that. Your presentation said that BPS will be funding continuing access to internet learning. What percentage of students do not have access to reliable internet at this moment? If you could share that with us. Nate, you mentioned some of the intensive support offered for students to recover learning loss, including summer school. I saw that there's an overall 30% reduction in school review programming. Could you talk about that reduction and what that means for reducing the learning loss? And we're using funding to improve staffing support for contact tracing, particularly notifying students regarding COVID cases and updates, et cetera. Are we utilizing some of the funding to address that? And why don't we just try to get through those, and then I'll have some follow-ups.
Okay. Let's work backwards. So we are continuing to do our COVID pool testing, and also looking to stand up support of getting our 16 plus students vaccinated. So those projects are ongoing. We do anticipate more students in our summer programming this year than we had previous. And so we'll have summer learning going on in our schools, as well as our partnerships with enrichment programs with Boston After School and Beyond. As you know, they have over 200 partners who work with us, so as not to compete with some of those programs. We're being mindful and getting students a plan. So school leaders will work with teachers to get students a plan and put that in our Panorama program, where we have students on success plans for accessing any kind of supports that they would need, whether it's accelerate and give them a boost around their academics, or whether it's social emotional well-being. We also do have summer school planned for social emotional supports this summer. We plan on hiring additional social workers. I don't have the final number, but I think it's somewhere around 10 or more social workers that will be working with us, and then some psychologists. They're working on the final plans now for the summer support systems around our families and students in terms of their mental health and re-engagement. You will also be working with the city on jobs and working with our youth and family services on programs that they also hold for our students. In terms of
Sorry, Brenda, before you continue, can you just give us an idea of how many, can you give me some numbers, like how many students are thinking of serving? What's the capacity look like? Can you give me some specific numbers? Like what's
I think we're planning on serving about 9,000. I think we had that we were planning on serving, and then Boston After School and Beyond was serving something like 10,000 or more. I don't have those exact numbers. Nate, do you have the exact numbers? I see you put your
our plan for we are planning for every child this summer that wants and needs support. So 23,000 plus served either through our programming or partnerships, as the superintendent mentioned, through Boston After School and Beyond.
And we're trying to track those as well, Counselor, through our system, so we can have good data on that. Then in terms of trauma informed for teachers, teachers can always apply and get support from our employee assistance program. I know that there's been a number of school leaders who have done support with our rebuilding of community within their own schools, and so they're providing support that way. As for families, we have our family liaisons in schools. The addition of the family liaisons for next year are to help parents access any kind of support that they have if they're in crisis, or if they need, if their house was a fire. All of those types of things will be what our family liaisons are helping with. Yes?
And to that point, in regards to when I'm thinking about family engagement, and I really do appreciate the investments on the family liaisons, I'm just curious, when we really think about how do we engage families, what's the plan for ensuring that parent council meetings are robust? Are there any opportunities to provide parents with stipends? We always ask parents who are already experiencing enough financial hardship to show up. What is in place to help support parents, are even by providing them stipends for participation or food budget?
Well, I don't think Monica Roberts is on this call, but we can certainly get back to you on the availability of some of the creative things. I know our federal funding can't be used for direct payments to families, and so I'm not certain about the stipends, but sometimes we do have other types of partnerships and things that we can do, but I can certainly explore that with our family liaison office. Our parent university has been working all year around working with parents and how they could access remote learning, or how they can do parenting during this difficult time, and providing additional time for parents just to connect with other parents.
No, I appreciate it. I see the gap, and I want to make sure that my first question gets answered, because that is a priority for a lot of the folks that I've been working with.
I'd be glad to answer it.
Could we answer that before I get gobbled out? I want to know specifically about this task force. How is it composed? The role that, how many parents, how many students? And I would like to know how you got to that, because we made recommendations, and those we didn't even know that there was a task force being put together. So just like the information is not trickling down to folks. So I'm just curious about what that process has been like. If active engaged parents and people like me aren't in the know, I'm just curious about your dissemination of communication around that.
So I'm glad to share with you. So we put out a press release today. I think we shared it with all the counselors. So you should have the list of everybody who's on it. We tried to have an external body that is going to be looking at recommendations that are going to be from our internal body. So we will be talking to school leaders. We'll be talking to all of the formal groups, Citywide Parent Council. We'll be talking to SPEDPAC, DLAC, ELL Task Force, the OAG Task Force, all of folks who are very familiar with our strategic plan. The reason that I selected the individuals on our current commission that I did on the invitee list was because it is an external group of stakeholders to give them an opportunity to be able to weigh in on any draft plans that we put together and to help us refine our planning and give us the lens of the community. So those are 2 from higher ed, 2 from faith-based community, 2 from our business community. There's all these different types of categories: philanthropy, nonprofit. So it's really an externally based group to give them an opportunity to weigh in on the work of this funding and to give voice to that. There's also reopening task forces that we're doing with our teachers, who will give us feedback as well. School leaders, we have parents on that. We have students on those task forces, so they'll be able to give us feedback as well. This past couple of months, we've been doing what's called a wiki wisdom, getting field information from all of our 10,000 employees that wanted to provide input into how should we think about this funding. So that report will be presented to me and President Tang on May 3rd. So really excited to get those recommendations. And then there'll be opportunities at the end of each commission meeting. We will have only 5 meetings, 2 next month and 2 in June, and then we'll present the final plan July 1st. And then at the end of each meeting, we'll have a public comment period so that folks can provide public comment on those meetings. And then in the interim, again, we'll be meeting with parents and students, and that'll all be on our website. We will have broadcast that in our parent newsletter in multiple languages and make it available for them. So there'll be a lot of opportunity over the next 2 months for our internal group to be able to provide information. So that's why parents haven't heard about it. We still are yet waiting on our guidance from the state, who hasn't yet, we have not received that guidance yet. So we didn't want to get ahead too much of that, but we do know that we are going to want to have external voices as well.
Yeah, so I'm just curious because you said there would be 2 students and 2 parents. Is that what I heard you say?
On this body, but there will be multiple parents and students involved in other bodies that we put together.
How are those 2 students and parents elected and nominated?
We have a parent from SPEDPAC, and we have a parent that will be from the Citywide Parent Council.
And so
the students are from our BSAC.
I'm also curious I do appreciate the level of engagement in terms of like making sure that parents and students have a voice. I'm just curious about there's a formal and then there's an informal voice. And I'm just curious about what role the parents and the students are going to play in bringing in their constituencies into the space. Like what is that going to look like?
Yeah, I think once we have a draft, I think the best way that we can get parent voice is at the school level. So we'll be having this at the district-wide community roundtable, and we've had really good participation, upwards of 100 people attending those meetings initially, and I think we have somewhere around 60 or 70 now. And then we have school-based equity roundtables, and we're going to ask our school leaders to engage with their school equity roundtables around our draft plans. And that way then everybody can see that on the parent councils, on the school equity roundtables. We'll have a 30-day public review and comment period where that will be up and available. So we'll be getting a lot of feedback on how to use this funding over the next 3 years.
And Dr. Castillo, this will be my last question is I'm just curious about how you came to construct your task force. Like, who did you consult with? Who provided feedback? Because I'm just like, these are the questions that I'm getting in terms of.
It's great. It's a great question, Counselor, and I appreciate it. The way that I selected those was to look at folks who are very engaged in our community and understand our strategic direction, because we only have a series of 5 meetings and 4 in person. They're going to have to already be very familiar. Otherwise, they'll sit there quiet and not engage as much because they'll be learning. So I picked them because they are familiar with or provide a lot of input to the school district in our strategic planning during our time of creating the strategic plan and currently our reopening plans.
And you know, and I appreciate that. And I also just think in terms of just a best practice, if we're really serious about building trust and community engagement, that we can't continue to just engage the usual suspects and those who are well-versed, because those who are living the realities often aren't participating in the equity roundtables. And the equity roundtables are not happening all across all schools. And so there's just a lot of gaps and opportunities for us to really strengthen our family and community engagement. If we're really serious about building that trust, then it has to start with creating space for folks who are not usually at the table. And I think that that's what I'm really going to be leaning on. And then the last thing that I'll say is that the McKinley schools and Madison Park, the Sarah Greenwood and the McKay and the McCormick are going to be some of the schools that during the next 35,000 hearings that we have here that I'm going to be really leaning on. And while language access was my thing last year, I'm really going to go hard on equity and making sure that families are driving these conversations and the role that we're playing and making that happen.
I appreciate that, Counselor. And I just want you to understand from my perspective in terms of how I'm putting this together, this body is one of multiple bodies that we will have providing input. And so this is the external body of stakeholders and partners, more so than it is the on the grounds folks who will be involved at the school level, providing input to our schools and their school budgets, as well as the district and centralized supports that we're planning on putting out to the school, out to all of our schools and students. So multiple opportunities for people to be involved.
Thank you. Thank you, Counselor Mejia. I let that go because I think it's important for us to talk about accountability, and obviously one of the other bodies that will be focusing on these dollars is the City Council, but we do have a bunch of counselors waiting to get in, and we'll do a second round if needed. So I think Councillor Arroyo is next, and then I'll go to Councillor. I'm going to reinsert Councillor Flynn in the order because I see that he just joined us. So Councillor Arroyo and then Councillor Flynn, and then I think it's Councillor Flaherty after that. But Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to try and let you rest that arm. I'm going to make sure I'm not going on that long. Thank you so much to BPS for being here today. So many of the questions I have already been asked. So I'm just going to jump into some very specific ones, starting with the buses. DESI has basically made it clear that the spacing on the buses is no longer a requirement. So are we going to have enough funding in this budget to ensure that we have enough bus monitors to ensure that windows and masks are being adhered to?
Absolutely. The DESI guidance says that you can have 2 kids per bench now. The biggest thing is making sure that the windows are down. And so we're working with them on that in terms of that. So capacity is not an issue for us, but having monitors, we have openings right now for monitors, and we are going to have to bring our monitors on. I'm not sure, Nate, if you want to talk about any of the shifts we're making with the monitors.
Yeah, I would just add, so there is a planned investment around bus monitors, both in terms of how many bus monitors we have so that we have greater availability for all of our buses, but then also thinking about how do we route and deploy bus monitors, and thinking about sort of the reform of the process. One of the things that we have is we know that some of the schools are writing into the IEP process bus monitors for every student when they want one on the bus, as opposed to needing a one-to-one, but they're writing them in that way. So it's a reform process. We're thinking about how do we distribute those bus monitors differently. Transportation will be the topic of a hearing later, and I don't want to sort of misspeak. I know Del Stanislaus, our Director of Transportation, will be able to answer much more eloquently and thoroughly your questions on bus monitors. But there is an investment, a multi-million-dollar investment in bus monitors, both in how we deploy and the number that we have.
Thank you for that. And then a question about our contract with the NWEA exam. Given that exam was suspended for the year, are we still spending money on that? And if we are spending money on that, how much is that? What are we doing? And if we're not, where are we reallocating that funding?
Do you want to speak to that, Nate, or should we?
Yeah, I can go back and find out exactly what was expended. I believe that because the exam wasn't administered, the costs were not incurred. I would say, generally speaking, across our budget in any given year, we have areas where we have overspending and underspending. And in this year in particular, we have so many areas of new costs that we were redeploying resources from contracts that we were not using to cover the cost of some of our higher COVID costs. And so we're at the point in the year where we've now hit our spending deadline, and we're starting to go through and see what available funds we have and how we can best manage our costs. We are anticipating closing this year on budget, probably the 31st year in a row. I know that also part of our expansion around the Exam School Initiative is an expansion of Exam School Initiative to be able to support students when the exam is administered.
So just, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but in terms of the time, I promise not to make the chair hold the gavel up for very long. So in terms of the money that we might have not incurred, how much exactly is the yearly cost for the NWEA?
I'll have to get back to you on the cost. I'll have that number for you at either after this hearing or in time for our next hearing.
Thank you. And when I say that, just so you know what I'm asking for, the cost of the exams, the cost for the process of actually proctoring the exams, the total cost that goes with the administration of those exams and the exams themselves. Another question, of the approximately 342 BPS contracts, to my calculation, only one is a minority-owned and small locally owned business, which represents only 0.29% of BPS contracts. Is that correct? Is that the most up-to-date information? And if it is, or if it isn't, what efforts are being made by BPS to ensure that we're actually contracting with small local minority or women-owned businesses?
This is a critical question for us as a district, and I don't know. I don't have the numbers. I don't know if David or Miriam have them. We will verify the numbers on the contracts that go to minority and women-owned businesses. We have been working very closely with the Mayor's Office of Economic Development. We have a new business manager, Naveen Reddy, who some of you may know from, he was at City Hall most recently working in the auditing department. But he's come over and made this an area of emphasis for his team and our work. And so at BPS, a lot of our contract decisions, a lot of our purchasing decisions, particularly those under $50,000 where we can see the most opportunity to leverage minority and local businesses, right? Those are the contracts that are awarded not through a formal RFP process. That is our biggest opportunity to really promote. And so the guidance that has been given to us from the mayor's office, of course, is to require that we secure quotes. What we're doing is increasing our training. We have a plan for making sure everyone understands the new rules, emphasizing this as part of our procurement process. And then also then working with them to figure out how can we promote and make sure that we are doing enough outreach to minority and women-owned businesses. This is an area that we have not done particularly well in the past. And probably an understatement. And it is an area that we're putting together a specific plan to address across the schools, because there are significant opportunities to invest in local-owned businesses, women and minority-owned businesses through the BPS.
So I'm gonna stop you there so we can get into how much time do I have, Madam Chair?
You were about to get the gavel warning. So.
Okay, so I'm going to ask my last question, which is hopefully a very quick one, which is BPS last year had an online tool that basically broke down the fiscal year 21 budget process and allowed people to look at where funding for each school was directed, and also a side-by-side comparison of weighted student funding for each school. Are there any plans to bring that back for this year?
Yes, we had a few technical difficulties this year that has delayed, but that tool should be updated. I'm looking to David.
This week, if not today.
All right.
I apologize, Counselor. It makes me very happy to hear that you enjoyed it and you've used it. And my apologies for our delay in getting it up for you.
No worries. I'm just happy to hear it's coming back. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to BPS for these questions and your excellent work this year. It's been a tough year.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Arroyo. Next up is Councilor Flynn, and then it'll be Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Bach, and it's good to be with the school superintendent. Thank you for being here with us, Brenda, and with your dedicated and professional team as well. I've worked with the superintendent since she started, especially on outreach to our Asian students. And obviously it's been a terrible and difficult year for everybody, but it's also been especially a difficult and terrible year for our Asian students in BPS in our city. So, Superintendent, as we slowly come back in person, we still know that Asian students are at the highest number of almost declining to come back for many reasons, including safety, including some bullying, not necessarily, I'm not saying in the school, but bullying outside of the school. I was just on a meeting with the Chinese Golden Age home an hour ago, and we were talking about anti-Asian violence. But I just wanted to ask you, Superintendent, what are some of your plans, knowing that we had an awful year for the Asian community as well? What type of outreach and programs are we planning on doing to make it more comfortable, engaging, comfortable for Asian students in BPS?
Well, I just want to thank you, Counselor, for your leadership as well, and always including us in your meetings and making sure that we're responsive and holding us accountable. So that's really important to us. Our Department of Equity, under Dr. Granson's leadership, has been meeting with the Asian community for several months now. After the unfortunate comments that were made at school committee, we continue to meet with our Asian community around better and higher quality interpretation services at meetings, making sure that we are addressing the concerns that they've brought forward and meeting more regularly with them, hearing their voice. And so I share your concern about the numbers and the surveys that we're seeing. Some of that is just the general numbers we're seeing around disproportionate numbers of families of color choosing to keep their children at remote. Some children are actually doing okay in remote learning, and it's working well for them. And then some of them have expressed that they are more fearful to come out into the community. And so we'll continue to lift that up. We've sent family letters. I've made myself available to meetings with families, and we'll just continue to do that work and ensure them that we stand with them in solidarity against these hateful acts, and continue to work with our Asian students and teachers who are supporting them.
Thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate your leadership on this important issue, and you have been working hard in making sure that the Asian community is engaged in part of the process and discussion. So I want to say thank you to you, Superintendent. And my final question is, if students, maybe it's more of a general question, if students want to engage in summer school programs, can you tell me what the process is? I received a couple calls from parents. I just want to provide them with the correct information on exactly what steps they need to do and what school they would go to, and would it be math and science and English and reading, or is it a curriculum that's more geared toward the student? If you can just give me a little bit of that type of information.
Well, there will be both, counselors. So there'll be academic programming that's geared to the students, in particular those who are doing extended years, so teachers know where they're at. And then there will be other programs and opportunities for students to engage in coursework. There'll be credit recovery coursework for our high school students who maybe are going to be summer grads and they want to get caught up. They maybe had an incomplete this year and want to get caught up. And so that'll be available. There will be enrichment opportunities in art and music and athletics, sailing, and other things that we do with our Boston After School and Beyond. We have a website called Summer Stuff. You can go to bostonpublicschools.org and click on the Summer Stuffs icon, and you can find information there. We'll be doing a launch, I think, next week on summer schools so that we can more publicly talk about all our final plans for summer school. As you know, all of our attention has been on this week and opening up schools. And so we will try to get our communications out to all of our families. And then our teachers and our school leaders will help us and our family liaisons and social workers will help get the information to parents in their home language so that they know what opportunities are available to their students and get them signed up.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent. Council Block, I have no further questions. I just want to acknowledge over the last several months, Liz Sullivan has been extremely helpful on a lot of related issues. So I just want to say thank you to Liz for working with my staff and my team on various BPS issues.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Flynn. There's always time for a Liz Sullivan shout out. Councillor Flaherty?
Good morning, Madam.
Oh, you just muted, Councillor.
Sorry. Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, Superintendent and her team. A couple quick things on the capital. Just wanted to talk about obviously the Bill BPS has worked wonders. Previous administration squandered significant opportunities to revitalize and to build new schools under the school building assistance program. So I'm happy to see that our former Mayor Walsh and his administration led those efforts on that front. And we're starting to see that pay dividends. Quick question on the HVAC. Obviously, air quality moving forward as we reopen and recover is critical. Want to see what efforts or attention to detail with respect to our school buildings have been placed on the HVAC. And then staying on capital as we're sort of educating less kids than we were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Any thought to retrofitting or refitting or repositioning some of our school building assets to accommodate the demand for early education and to preschool on the capital side of the house. And then on the operating side, obviously, I'd like a per pupil cost and get an assessment as to whether or not that's enough to accommodate the lost learning throughout COVID as it pertains to our Boston Public School students, and what efforts will be undertaken and how much money will be spent for summer programming to, again, get our kids caught up. I don't need to tell folks on this Zoom that we're in a global economy, and we've got CEOs moving their companies here because of the brain power, because of our academic institutions, because of our healthcare, because we're a walkable, livable, relatively safe city compared to cities our size and bigger. So we're attractive. It's what, and it's that mojo, along with our championship teams. It's what gives Boston street cred, and I think a lot of folks want to be able to participate in that economy. Are we preparing the next generation? Are we preparing our kids for those jobs that are going to be coming online? So I'd love to have a discussion about sort of getting our subject matter thought process around the jobs that will be coming online, as opposed to sort of like the teaching to the MCAS test and making sure that we have curriculums that support that type of growth, the job growth, and to close not only the achievement gap but the opportunity gap. And in addition to that, what are we doing for our intellectually gifted students by way of advanced work program and AP classes? I understand that there's a lot of frustration around, availability of both advanced work and AP classes. And again, obviously it's never a one size fits all. We need to make sure that we're doing the best we can, representing, particularly as we open for those that have been impacted the most. But we also need to make sure that we don't forget students there that are trying to compete in the global economy, and make sure that we're advancing their education as well. So that's it in a nutshell for me. A couple capital questions, a couple operating questions as it pertains. And then finally, as folks know, that the council created a new committee on the COVID reopening, and I'll be chairing that. So I'll be working closely, obviously, with the superintendent. So does the district have a solid idea as to what levels of federal funding will be arriving for our schools? And to date, what's the time frame and what plans have been set for that funding. And let's sooner rather than later, let's get together and start to sort of coordinate schedules around when we should start to have hearings around that. So that's it in a nutshell for me, Madam Chair, and I'll put myself on mute and listen to the responses.
Okay, well, that was a lot. I'll have Mr. Cooter take some of them, and I'm going to speak to a few. So take note in what I talk about, Nate, and then you can do the rest.
Perfect.
So I do want to just echo and share your concern. One, that there are a lot of assets within the community within Boston that are wonderful places that make this place, a city, very attractive. And one is its people and the way that they come together around challenge and the resilience. And that's just absolutely fabulous. The other that you bring out is the fact that we still send our kids to subpar school buildings and facilities. And I've heard from several counselors today that this is a huge concern. And I hope that we'll see improvement and courage in all of us in terms of funding our school buildings to make sure that children get the school buildings that they deserve to have the strong academic programs that they need. In terms of advanced work class, we have a working group right now looking at our advanced work class and how to expand opportunities for our students at the younger grades to have rigorous opportunities. At the upper grades, as part of our high school redesign, our teachers have been getting trained around pre-AP in the middle school and AP and increasing AP across our schools. We have many schools that don't offer advanced placement courses. So we have the opportunity now with every student being one-to-one to be able to do that more, both in the remote environment and maybe simultaneously. So we're looking at some of that in terms of virtual opportunities. And then we're expanding International Baccalaureate at a couple of schools this year, maybe more schools in the next several years as part of our high school redesign, and then creating a more well-rounded opportunity for our students to expand in the arts across and citywide, and elite art programs for our students so that they don't have to go out to the suburbs for high-end arts programming for our gifted students, and then athletic programming as well, and making sure that students have athletic programs all the way from the elementary grades to the middle and high school. And it's part of our Pathways program to a more well-rounded, more rigorous opportunity across our schools. We are also planning on additional access for high-quality seats across the city, both in our community-based organizations and in our schools. If we can expand seats in our schools that maybe are choosing no longer to have the 7th and 8th grade because there's a high school in the corner that's going to have 7th through 8th grade. So then we can exchange some of those seats for early childhood over the next several years. So that's in the planning around our capital planning and our academic plan for acceleration. I'll let Nate answer the other questions.
I think the only question I think you didn't touch upon is the question around HVAC improvements. The thing I'll just note is we are assessing the HVAC for buildings that have HVAC units already in. We are assessing the maintenance needs and investments that we need to make sure that they, don't fall into the situation that we had at the Jackson Man around the air handling units. That we do have a number of our buildings, as everyone knows, a significant number of our buildings were built before World War II. And there's no way for us to put in HVAC units in those buildings without effectively spending as much as if we had built a brand new building. And so what we are looking to do is launch a new school building program. We intend this capital budget is going to include new construction of elementary schools. So of course, we're also have a project around the Horace Mann School for the Deaf and getting them new modern facility as part of a long-term planning. And then you're going to see upgrades around windows and air quality handling units as part of this capital budget as well. So those are two things I just wanted to go ahead and touch upon as you mentioned specifically about capital.
And Councillor Flaherty, I think before you were on, we did make mention of the fact so that the capital focused hearing will be on Thursday, and then we've also got another BPS capital focused hearing later in May, which will come after their presentation of the updated Bill BPS to the school committee. So just there is a little bit of hold that question on some of the capital stuff.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much. That brings us now to myself, and then we'll run back through for anyone who has a second question. So if you want to just let me know as counselors whether you have a second round of questions, that would be helpful. I will put a timer on myself. The first thing I just want to say is I think the idea of a consultative committee, which, as you say, superintendent is amongst many groups being consulted vis-a-vis the federal money, makes good sense. What I don't think is going to work for the city council is not knowing how much of that money is dedicated for FY22 and to what purposes prior to our vote on the FY22 school budget. So I think that we need to talk, and I also think that, one of the things that we've seen this year is that there's lead time on spending money, and that if we want to use it effectively in FY22, there's probably got to be some preparation that starts pretty imminently, especially when you think about the first half of the year. So I think, with my kind of ways and means hat on in this process, I do want us to have further conversation about how to coordinate that piece a bit better, because I think that for the council, we've got to have a sense of what the anticipated supports from the federal money in FY22 are. Everything else, there's time for the deliberative process and all the stakeholders to play out, but that's a concern of mine.
Can you explain some more, Counselor, what you mean? Like that wouldn't threaten any of the 36 million, correct?
No. Yeah. What I'm saying is that, but for us, right, what we're approving overall, right, is the plan for FY22 that's general funded. And I think for the council to know, because you can imagine a situation in which a counselor is like, but how can I approve FY22 plan that doesn't have the 10 million in supports I think we need for XYZ? And your actual answer to that is, we're going to propose those supports in FY22 to be funded through the federal funds. But if the council doesn't know that, because we're waiting on a July 1st announcement, then it's hard to set people's minds at ease that all of the pieces that need to be in place for the first fiscal year of this funding are in place. So I think that's my challenge with the timeline.
So I guess the only feedback I would offer on that is it's going to be challenging to get it in the timeline that you need, but we will do our best to get some drafts to the council so that they can have that prior to their vote. But with this funding, the majority of the funding that we're asking from the council for this operational budget is the $18.5 million to hold harmless our schools around their staffing levels within their schools. Otherwise, we would see massive cuts right now to almost all of our schools. So I'm sure that that's something that we want to invest in. So that is absolutely essential, and that funding's already gone out and principals are starting to hire on that. The other is social workers and family liaisons, which are going to offer the kind of support that we need for a trauma-informed return to support our families and to support our students. The social workers also help us with our tier 2 interventions for students. And then the rest of it is really around health and safety for our custodial staff and pushing out our hub community school model in the Grove Hall community and within our dual language schools. So that is the major portions of our operational budget that we're asking you to consider and to support. The funding that's going to come on the $400 million additional funding that's coming to us is federal funding that will be 20% is required to be spent on recovery. Much of that will be spent on summer recovery over the next 3 years because we don't think the recovery is going to be just 1 year recovery. It's going to take multiple years, especially for our high school students and our students who are at the youngest ages. We anticipate we want to use all 3 years. So we're looking at somewhere around $125 million each of the 3 years that we would like to use. Some of that will have to be for still mitigating the COVID response for things we don't anticipate now or don't even know about. We've had to reinvent all of education, so we have to have that. The 20% set aside for recovery, we plan on giving schools additional funding for them to use for supporting their quality school improvement plans, and then some centralized deployment of resources, which I'm not certain we will know yet, and then some money for partnerships. And so we can activate some partnerships and leverage some contracts and support services that we need for students, tutoring, mentoring, mental health providers, additional staffing that we might need within schools to support the recovery as we return to school. So that's kind of how we're thinking about that $400 million.
No, and that's helpful. And I think what I'm trying to say is I think that I do think that the council needs, it doesn't need all of the T's to be crossed and I's to be dotted. And I think there's lots of respect for the public comment period and all the stakeholders. But I think that the council does need to have some sense of the overall shape of that 125. It's like, and I totally take your point, right, that I think that lots of the things that are being proposed in the operating budget, which of course are funded through the general fund, but also have ARP funding that's general supporting the overall, right? Like the overall budget ask here, they're critical things. I think it's just like that from the council's perspective, you know, we from our constituents are getting all kinds of questions about how the supports are going to exist in this coming year. It's sort of like if we were building a house and I said, I really want to know about what the roof is going to be like. And you said to me, yeah, but counselor, what I'm asking you to initial is these like 4 critical walls. And I'm like, yes, the walls are critical. But it makes me uneasy to initial the building with the walls and not knowing about the roof. And I just think with what we're hearing from everybody, the council has a kind of duty to make sure also that we can tell people, yes, there's going to be like that 125 that gets expended in FY22. There's going to be an actionable plan that can be implemented fast enough that it actually comes in to support, and being realistic about what that looks like. I just think that it's all of a piece for us. So I just want to, this is obviously today's the first time seeing this timeline, and I'm just flagging that I think we do need to at least figure out some of that kind of skeleton of the thing in a way that can be shared with us sooner. But we can have,
as soon as I can. It was just past Congress about a month ago. So, and we're still waiting on DESE guidance. As soon as we get the state guidance, we'll have more brass tacks on what the state's expectations are. And so as soon as we get it, we'll make sure that we try to communicate. Megan will get you out drafts and make sure that you have it as soon as we possibly can.
Great. And then my follow-up is just enrollment. So totally agree about holding harmless, and we don't know which way things are going. And I'm also not gonna push us right now to say what would we do if we were in a disaster, in the sense that in a year from now enrollment is still declining. Obviously, as several counselors have referred to, that creates major structural issues that we were already grappling with, and that would be deepened by the trajectory that we're on right now. What I want to ask about is how, like what we're planning to do proactively to try to increase enrollment, because I think we've talked a little bit about the hope that enrollment will increase, that it will turn out that we had just this temporary inflection from the pandemic and things will bounce back. But in terms of like, because to me it's sort of like red alert, right? And so it's like, what are we doing to proactively drive back up enrollment? Like, are we adding funding that we see as being an investment in that activity specifically, or how should I think about that?
It's been incredibly challenging this year. Obviously, the anti-immigrant environment for the past 4 years has been quite challenging to the school district in terms of our enrollment, because we have such a large and beautiful immigrant population that comes in. So we're hoping the change in policy at the largest administrative level will help with that, and we will continue to see our families feel more comfortable coming to our schools here in Boston. Also, state-to-state travel has been very challenging because of the pandemic over the past year, and that was unanticipated. You know, we didn't know that we'd have the pandemic, so a lot of folks just not moving during this time period, state to state. So there's some less of that. We also see at the younger grades with our little students, where parents took a gap year. So that has been a struggle for us. And then some of our older students not continuing to persist would be another area. So I would say that, we are continuing to work on access for early childhood as a pro-enrollment strategy. I think also we lose students in third and fourth grade. So solidifying our pathways is another strategy, and getting that finalized so that parents have only one transition during their school year. That's something parents have really told us is important to them. And our choice and assignment system is a bigger project to take on as we try to create high quality schools across all of our neighborhoods, which is going to be a multi-year effort. And building the confidence and trust of our school public in the work that we do with children is critical. And so I think those are the bigger things for us. And then quite honestly, for me as an external person who came to Boston as a new school leader, when I went into all 125 buildings, as many of you have pointed out today, you look at the facilities and you walk up or you walk in and you don't even give it an opportunity or a chance because the facility is in such need of improvement. So I think that that's another big piece for us to be able to have a pro-enrollment strategy, so to speak. And we are putting money on that. And putting money on early childhood and putting money on this pathway work in terms of improving our rigor across our school district. The other thing that I think is really important, and I'll be brief, is arts programming and athletic programming, and our kids being able to have a well-rounded education school to school. That is not provided right now, and we need to put the money in that. We can start that with the $400 million, but we're going to need a commitment from the city to sustain the effort when we do citywide arts and citywide sports across the district.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that and agree. I think a lot of those things are key to parents making their decisions. That's definitely my time, so I'll go back up to the top of the order and I'll go to Asabi George, then Campbell, then Mejia. Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and I'll be quick because I know we'll get further into the weeds on a lot of these topics as the budget season progresses. I would just say, Superintendent Cassellius, just to your point around high quality schools in all of our neighborhoods and that kids have access to high quality schools. The answer really is making sure that all schools and all classrooms are high quality, and that removes that challenge around kids finding that high quality school. And, I forget which of my colleagues brought up some of our charter schools spending issues. And I'm wondering if there has been any effort to think creatively about investments in our facilities in a similar way that our charter school partners have done their investments. Most charter schools here in the city of Boston, if not all of them, have had some significant investments in their facilities, some new constructions and pretty large rebuilds. And they've been able to take advantage of some tax credits, both I think at the state and federal level, at least certainly at the state level. I wonder if we have any opportunities to learn from how they access those investments or those tax credits and how we can maybe take advantage of that as a district.
Nate, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I looked into that probably 18 months ago or so. Curious about how their financing works. The federal programs and the state programs that I saw that the charter schools were leveraging were not available to governments, local governments, so they're not eligible for us. At the same time, we're eligible for MSBA funding and then have our independent bonding ability through the city's bonding ability. And so I think the questions around borrowing really are about overall the city's capacity for borrowing and also our capacity for managing and lining up our projects. One of the things that you asked for is a list of all the schools and the schedule. And that's something that we have not had and we're working towards so that we can start to bring more predictability so that if the next, I think you called it Bill BPS 3.0 comes in with an additional $1 billion or more, that we can clarify what's going to be done next. And so that people are not waiting around for answers from us.
I think that or more is the critical piece, because with the first $1 billion, just thinking about whether it's a significant renovation or rebuild or some more cosmetic renovations, we're only getting 10 schools out of that $1 billion. And we know we've got 125 buildings across the district. So that's wasn't a math major, but we're looking at $15 billion or so to make that happen. But that's it for me, Madam Chair, for this round. Look forward to sort of the topic-specific hearings over the course of the season. Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you to your team.
Thank you. I just want to mention, Counselor, also that we anticipate $100 billion from the Biden infrastructure bill coming to cities across the nation for their schools. And so as we think about that, if there is $100 billion that's coming across the nation to schools, that's still not going to be enough to, for all the schools that are out there, it's still not going to be enough to look at new builds, but it may be a nice way for us to think about major renovations too in some of our schools and matching funds from the city.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks, Councillor Asabi George. We are all awaiting the infrastructure plan, although obviously we need to plan for the bird in hand first, but the infrastructure plan, if it comes through anything like proposed, would make a big difference across a number of city departments. All right, I think Councillor Campbell has had to go and we'll save her questions for the next hearing. So Councillor Mejia, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. So thank you to Dr. Casilius and her whole entire team. I'm going to be really quick again, trying to get through all my questions. I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Flaherty's question. Is it the plan for BPS to replace all schools that are not able to be retrofitted with the HVAC systems? Just if you can provide me some more specifics around that. And I'm also curious, are we planning to have to reduce the class size to provide more focused support for students as they re-enter? And on the on the stated BPS goals for the budget is to graduate, quote unquote, all students from high school prepared for college and career. We saw that in the budget book that there are some schools that have 80% success rate. Congratulations. Schools like the Boston Latin Academy and Boston Latin School, but I'm curious to get the graduation figures for every school. Is that information that you'd be able to pass over to us, and what schools have the lowest graduation rates? If you can share that with us, that would be great. I'm also curious what is being done to support McKinley students in particular. It seems to me like it's a feeder for the school to prison pipeline. Most of our students are ending up in DYS, and with up to $77,000 per student, what does the return on those investments look like? And what are we doing to support Madison Park High School? Why aren't they part of the Build BPS plan? What is BPS doing to leverage their networks to secure paid internships with Voc Tech students? And can you just talk to us a little bit about the languages that the family liaisons speak, and how does the languages they speak determine where they're placed in our district? And if I can get more, I will. But for now, those are what I have.
And I'll just break in, Councilor Mejia, and say that I may let the BPS team defer the McKinley and Madison Park questions to our afternoon hearing, because that's the school budgets focused hearing specifically. So I just want to flag that that's where we're going next.
Well, then just be warned that I want those numbers and that information.
We'd be glad to get you all of the graduation figures. I do think that's on our website that we post school by school graduation. So we'll make sure that we get that to you so that you can have that and you can see where that's at. We are not planning on reducing class size across the district as a major strategy. However, I'm sure that there are some schools that will choose to do flexible grouping with students where needed to bring down class size. We did do a push-in of a paraprofessional in all K-2 classrooms this year as part of a previous budget. So we did the K-2 expansion for paraprofessionals. The replacement of HVAC, I think, is again part of our overall capital budget planning process and which schools are having replacements. We do not plan at this time to replace HVAC in every single 125 schools, but attending to HVAC is an important piece of the work that we're doing moving forward as part of our capital budget. McKinley and Madison Park are on our list of schools to definitely have as priorities. So more to come on that in terms of our planning around that. And then languages for for our family liaisons are chosen based on the languages spoken at the school. So we do our best to try to match that up as best we can.
Thank you for that. And so I'm just curious about accountability around school-based management, and curious about what investments are going to be made so that families feel authentically represented and include the voices of parents. Like, what does the budget look like for that? For family engagement, I'm just curious about.
In the current budget, how have we included families?
Well, no, I'm curious. So let me read. This is a question from the community: is what investments are being made in supporting a more systemic way to involve families and community? The BTU steering committee that guides governing boards at schools recently reconvened after several years of absence. What investments are we making to ensure families and communities are included in meaningful ways to support school-based decision-making, school site councils at traditional schools and governing boards at pilot schools, et cetera? So what investments are being made in that space?
Yeah, I think that Nate might be able to speak or David to the specific dollars that go directly to the training, but we have significant department in our family and community engagement office. They do a lot of work with our families and keeping them engaged. They train our parent councils. They do parent university, so we have investments there. We also have our equity roundtables at our school-based. Of course, those are maturing at different levels. We started those last year, so many of them are getting trained. We have a position in our equity office that works to train our equity roundtables, so we're happy with that. And then we have all of our different parent and community engagement groups like SPEDPAC, DLAC, Citywide Parent Council. Parents sit on all of our other task forces, so involving them that way as well. So those are the things that we're currently engaged in.
And then any investments on ethnic studies? What does that look like?
Yeah, I don't know about additional investments. We did put some investments this year. Nate, do you have those specific investments?
Yeah, there is part. And it depends on it specifically what you're talking about around the ethnic studies. There was additional funding in the academics team to fund a position for ethnic studies to be able to support the curriculum. There's also, we had implemented new literacy curriculum rollout last year as part of the funding. That funding is continued into FY22 and is bolstered by planned additional curriculum investments. As we start to think about ways to spend the ESSER funding, curriculum is a great way for us to be able to invest in, because when you implement a curriculum and you train teachers on a new curriculum, that's a multi-year investment. There's also, the reason I mentioned the ethnic studies is combined in sort of like us thinking about culturally and linguistically sustaining practices across, as we start to think about dual language program implementation. Cabo Verdean and Vietnamese are the two programs that we are actively implementing now. As part of it as well as a heritage language program at Burke High School.
And then speaking of investments being made, I'm just curious, are you guys thinking of hiring more reading and math interventionalists that can help support our students get back on track? And can you tell me what that dollar investment is? And I'm just curious about what feedback you've gotten around the equity roundtables. Just curious about why aren't they happening at all schools, and what are you all doing to engage more families, particularly those who are usually not engaged in the process?
Yeah, so that's at the school level, and so it's working with our school leaders, embedding that within our systems of feedback and feedback loops, making sure that they know that this is something that they are expected to do. So the school superintendents do check in with them. Dr. Granson's office is providing training to all of our school equity roundtables and working with them.
Well, how is that? Where's the accountability around that? Like, where are we in terms of determining outcomes and the return on investment and time around these equity roundtables? Like, what are we doing to hold schools accountable? If the communication is that it's important to have these, what is the district doing to hold these schools accountable to ensure that all schools are hosting the equity roundtables? What does that look like in terms of an accountability?
So Dr. Granson takes accounting of that in his office and how many meetings there have been. We've asked for membership from our school leaders, who's the members on the teams, who has and has not participated in the training as of yet. And parent and community engagement is part of the principal evaluation.
And so what happens if they're not participating fully on the equity roundtables? Like, what are we doing around that? Can you just kind of walk me through what the process looks like? If my daughter's school is not participating in the equity roundtables, what accountability measures are being put in place? How are they being held accountable? And again, I really want to talk about what are we doing to ensure that all voices are at the table, literally.
So we've collected the membership. So Dr. Granson has that, and he's been looking at our schools and who's members on each of the roundtables. We also have a specialist within our equity team that is going out and training. When we hear of school leaders who are having difficulty getting them started, they go out and provide training to the school leader. The school superintendents are working with their school principals. That's holding them accountable to doing these equity roundtables. And so we're still developing all of the systems around our accountability and making sure that they are conducted more regularly. It's my expectation that we have the district-wide equity roundtables. That information gets fed into the school equity roundtables. We're developing dashboards so that their data-driven decision-making is happening at the equity roundtables. But some of the work around them is still maturing and getting the proper training to all 125 schools. As you know, this year during the pandemic, it's been challenging to find the time for everybody to do that. But it is a goal of ours for this to be a major way of getting our families engaged and involved.
And then I don't think I got the question answered in regards to whether or not the commission and the task force that you created around these federal dollars, will that sustain throughout the year, or just this is a one-time situation? Like, what's going to be the communication beyond it? Is it going to stay in operation, and what does the plan look like moving forward beyond the initial community conversations?
Yeah. Currently, this is just a way to have the external partners provide input into the plan. I have not yet decided on what would be the structure for an advisory moving forward. I know that our equity roundtable, it has been on Zoom. We have had upwards of 100, 150, 180 people be on those calls. And that might be some sort of way to structure an advisory around that. So I'm just not certain yet how I want to have as an ongoing advisory capacity and who will help with the monitoring just yet.
And with all the learning loss, we know that literacy is a big concern for a lot of families. And I'm just curious, this is a question that we received in regards to libraries and what investments are being made to support our schools, particularly our schools that don't even have libraries. As we learned last year, there's some organizations that are funding libraries in certain schools like the Blackstone. And I'm just curious, since last year, what have you done in this budget to address the literacy and the connection with our libraries in so many schools that don't have any?
Nate can speak to the specific literacy initiatives within this budget, but I can tell you I share your concern about the number of schools that lack libraries, lack gymnasiums, lack auditoriums, lack science labs, lack cafeteria space. There is a number of work that we need to do on our facilities. And I also think that there's a great value in having a licensed librarian in our schools. So this budget does not make those investments. We had, there are trade-offs with the amount of funding that we have. And therefore, we've put our investments this year into the supports to families and to students' recovery. And that's where our supports are in this budget, but that doesn't mean future budgets or even this funding that we have coming from the federal government might not help us be able to lift up some of our libraries across some of our schools if that's a priority of the community.
Yeah, I see that, gavel. And before I get shut out, I just want to say thank you for the indulgence and for answering these questions. We really do appreciate you all being here. And I'm very proud to say that we're getting better at answering these questions so I can get through all of them. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Are All right, and then just my second round questions, and then we'll wrap up. I don't have anybody signed up for public testimony right now, so if you want to testify, you should email ccc.wm or come to one of the other hearings or the 6 p.m. one tomorrow night. But I guess my last round would just be on the family liaisons and social workers that we're hiring. I was sort of wondering, I know, Nate, you said the sort of spend by deadline just went by. I'm wondering, like, what our success rate was in filling the positions that we funded for the transformation schools last year, and sort of like based on that, what we think the kind of timeline for getting folks actually in these positions are. Because I know that, hiring, diverse qualified social workers is sometimes a challenge. And I know that there was some back and forth about sort of how quickly positions were getting filled this year. So if we're going to really double down on that personnel approach, kind of wondering how it went over the year past.
Yeah, I would. The spending deadline was for this current fiscal year and for our non-personnel spending. And so part of the reason that you're seeing a lot of these family liaison positions, social workers, were prioritized in this budget on general funds was so that we could begin the planning and hiring now. So we went through our school-based budgeting process in December and January. We went through what we refer to as probable board, which is the hiring sort of review of positions and getting prepared to post, for a goal to post our new positions all by early March. And so we've already begun the hiring process for next year, because we know that if we recruit and hire, we get the best candidates early in the hiring season, early in the spring. As somebody once told me, if you hire somebody in April, you hire a teacher. If you hire somebody in August, you hire somebody who wants a job teaching. And I think that's true across the board. We want to recruit early and have the first slice of the pie of hiring in the state. Last year, of the family liaisons, I can tell you 98% of them were people of color, and that 35 out of 48 had language abilities. And so not all of the schools were matched by language last year, but that shows that the intentional effort. And so a lot of that hiring is going on so that we are confident. As we get later into the year, it's much harder to add staff and full-time employees. And so we would look for our hiring cycle to match this on sort of an annual basis.
And so did we fully hire all of the social workers that we had funded for last year?
Oh, apologies. The question about the vacancy rate for social workers and family liaisons. David, I don't know. You have
Yeah.
I think we hired them all.
We hired them all. There's then, people go out on leave and other things happen, but we hired 48 family liaisons, 98% people of color, 63 social workers, which were 78% people of color, 50 new school nurses, 48% people of color, 41 instructional facilitators for the transformation schools for 50% people of color.
And then
I would just remind anyone who may be
our family liaisons as well.
Right.
And how many were, that was almost 100%.
Yeah, it was 48 hired, all but one was a person of color.
I would just, for anyone who is a licensed social worker in the greater Boston area, I would just
come to BPS.
We pay very well, particularly compared to most of our nonprofit and even for-profit mental health providers. So we tend to not have a problem with hiring. I will say we are taking intentional efforts to recruit candidates of color and candidates who speak other languages as part of the social worker investment, because we know that cultural match is critical to providing services. And so that has been an intentional effort of Sarah and Daly's team on the recruitment and cultural diversity, and the team leading the social worker hiring as well.
Great. Yeah. And I would just say, and this is for more bracketing for, next hearing that focused on this, but just, it would be helpful for us to hear, since in some ways the transformation schools last year were kind of like the vanguard, and now we're kind of following with this type of support in all the schools. It would be helpful to know kind of what the lessons learned from that first year are. Granted, it was a year like no other. So I recognize some of those lessons won't be relevant, but just in terms of, I know we've talked in another hearing just about the challenge of if you put somebody in a school and they're the only social worker in the school, so they don't have sort of a community of practice right there with them, how do we think about supporting those folks and kind of building them into the school apparatus? It just, since we're doubling down on that style of commitment, it would be helpful, I think, for the council to know.
And we've done some updating to the school committee of where we are, and we can certainly share that information with you of sort of learnings and best practices we've had so far.
Great. Yeah, and then I'll just say, I think I'll also, given the time and everything, bracket this for future conversation. But I'm very torn between, like, I think that given the challenges and the trauma of this year, that these kinds of supports are really important for our students. And I also recognize that the 18 or 18.5 million that we're spending to sort of hold schools whole is significantly benefiting a number of our high schools. But I do regret the fact that the sort of course of things has caused us to have to shift the second year investments away from the high schools, which is where we thought we were talking about them last year, into this other space. And I just, I'm very antsy about that. I represent a bunch of the high schools. I've got the Snowden and the Fenway in my district, along with, of course, the once and future home of BAA and BLS. And I just, and the EMK as well. So, I do want us to talk a little bit about, besides the fact that we're holding our high schools harmless, like, how are we creating a path into really strong, because I think that's been a thing that's come through across the board in this past year, is that all of our high schools need to be really strong and be perceived as really strong, and that we're not there. So I wouldn't want to leave the space without entering that sort of general concern.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a major priority for us. Parents look to the top and work way backwards. And so that's critical work for us in terms of our enrollment and in terms of our building confidence of our parents, so that they don't leave midterm in their careers in our schools.
Right. And so again, to that enrollment question, I think that it just means that what are we doing this year if because we're not dedicating the extra 30 to high schools. So, like, how do we think about what we're doing this year to sort of change the years around? I do think, Counselor, that a lot of the additional funding of the 400 and the 100 million that we'll have for next year will be on high schools as well. Okay, great. Well, that's I'm going to be trying to convince people that part of creating a well-rounded, rigorous education and also addressing the health and wellness of our students is going to be adding the arts and adding athletics this year. And that's something we can do with this additional funding. And hopefully the community will agree with me. Great. All right, great. Well, looking forward to that conversation, and also the capital conversation. You guys know, is a desire in my district. I think thinking about growing pre-K seats and elementary seats is good, but that's my own timer going off saying, I think it's time to draw this to a close and give ourselves a lunch break before the 2 p.m. So I think still no public testimony. So with that, anybody, Superintendent, did you want to say anything before I gavel us out? Well, I just want to thank you, Madam Chair, and the counselors for this time. I want to thank my team. And then just a reminder that I will not be in the afternoon hearing because I have some other commitments that I have to be at, but my team will be here. Great. Excellent. Yes. And they're an able team, and we count on many future opportunities through this process to have you with us as well, Superintendent. So thank you. Thank you. And with that, this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.